Well, it's a very interesting system. It's, again, been caricatured in the United States for so long as this kind of crazed Islamist dictatorship, when in fact it's a political experiment, I think, as profound as...
Wow. Former State Department official Hillary Leverett defending Iran as a political experiment, not unlike the United States. She offered those comments on MSNBC. Of course, we're waiting to see what happens by the deadline of midnight about this proposed nuclear deal, and to talk about it and the curious kind of indulgence the administration of the State Department offered to Iran, we're pleased to be joined to go in depth with Clare Lopez, Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy. Clare, let's get started. Do you view Iran as a political experiment similar to the United States?
Well, there's not much similar to the United States about it, JD. If you even look at the 1989 Iranian Constitution, it clearly states that it is a jihadist regime. It is established for the purpose of spreading Islamic revolution across the entire world. And in case you didn't quite get the message, it also includes a quote from the Quran from verse 860 in the Iranian Constitution about striking terror into the hearts of the enemy. That's the Iranian regime.
Now, these negotiations continue. We hear about the deadline, and we hear these assurances that the Iranians just want to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. What gives you pause or skepticism about the whole notion of peaceful purposes?
Well, quite a number of things. For one thing, Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that obligates it to be forthcoming to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's the monitoring agency for the United Nations for nuclear programs around the world, and it's obligated to report to it all of its activities and facilities. Well, every single facility we know about in the Iranian nuclear weapons program today, we know about from somebody else, not the Iranians who were obligated to report it themselves. The Iranian opposition, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, satellites, intelligence agencies, but never the Iranians themselves. So they have a record of duplicity, of cheating, of hiding their programs. And furthermore, if they wanted peaceful uses of nuclear energy, that's what the NPT is for. It's a sharing arrangement, but you got to be upfront with the IAEA. And Secretary General Yukiya Amano is not at all satisfied that they've come clean about their past activities. How on earth could we trust them going forward?
And just a couple of days ago, they said they would not ship any of their uranium stockpiles to Russia for safekeeping. They would just keep them in Iran. Thank you very much. Another clear warning sign there, Clare?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in the beginning, the demands were that, for one thing, the United Nations Security Council has 6 resolutions demanding that Iran halt all nuclear enrichment. The beginning of the talks envisioned that Iran would halt its enrichment, that it would ship all of its stockpiles of enriched uranium it already has out of the country, and it would dismantle, not just unplug, but take down its centrifuges. It's got 19,000 of them now. Around 10,000 are hooked up. And on every one of those counts, the United States and the P5+1 appear to have capitulated, in addition to which there's not any mention of Iran's delivery system for nuclear weapons, and that's its ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which, by the way, have the ability to reach continental United States of America from Iran right now.
With that chilling assessment, Clare, let's take a look at some numbers. According to a new Washington Post ABC News poll, I believe they have these numbers here, the headline reads, "Clear majority supports nuclear deal with Iran." They claim it's a 2-to-1 margin. We all know that political science at times can be an oxymoron. Doesn't that have more to do with the way in which the question is asked rather than... Go ahead.
It can sometimes, yes. But these are questions that have been asked repeatedly of the Iranian population. It's not just this one poll. And going back for quite a number of years, there has been consistent support for its nuclear program. Of course, it's not called a nuclear weapons program in the question, but the people do seem to support it, and it seems to be a matter of national pride. I mean, we make a mistake if we think that the Iranian people are completely divorced from their regime. The regime is brutal, it is totalitarian, it is jihadist, it inflicts Sharia on all of them. But at the same time, you look at Pew Research Institute polling, for instance, about Sharia in Iran, and the people support it, according to Pew. So yes, it matters about how the question might be asked sometimes, but when it's repeated over time and the answers come back consistently, then seems to be that there might be something to it.
Well, let me ask you a question that has nothing to do with polls and has everything to do with proliferation. Specifically now, we're hearing the Saudis want nukes. What would this deal do in terms of an arms race in the Middle East?
Oh, this would be a nightmare. We know from open source reporting going back at least a decade, even more, that the Saudis have been in discussions with the Pakistanis, which, by the way, remember, were the source of the first blueprints and know-how and parts for the Iranian nuclear program back in the 1980s when they started it under the Ayatollah Khomeini. So the Saudis are very much concerned, as are other Gulf states in the region, about the Iranian drive for a nuclear weapons capability, and they want the same thing for themselves naturally, and are figuring out ways to get it. The concept, the idea of a proliferation, nuclear proliferation race, arms race in the Middle East is staggering in its implications, it seems to me.
Claire, about a minute remains. I'm interested in your take on the mindset behind this. Is this the Obama administration trying to do the Nixon goes to China moment, trying to update it with some sort of diplomatic triumph? 1 minute, please.
It's hard to know, but I think that this administration came into office back in 2009 with an agenda specifically to withdraw American power and influence from the world, because they viewed our power and influence as a force for evil and ill in the world. And they decided in the Middle East that when we withdrew our power and our influence, abandon our traditional allies, including Israel, that the one that would fill in behind it in that power vacuum would be Iran. I think this is deliberate policy to allow Iran to be the hegemon of the Persian Gulf region and a nuclear power if they want it to be.
It's hard to see how that helps American interests anywhere. But Clare Lopez, the Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy, we thank you for that rather stark and candid assessment and look forward to visiting with you again in the days ahead. Now, when we come back, Ken Edelman will be here to talk about Reagan, Reykjavik, the Russians, and negotiations.